there. So, you want to live in a community. That's what I'm calling this film. I'll explain to you all that I've discovered on this subject. First thing you have to work out, is this something you're going to do on your own? Or are you going to get a group of people together? If it's something you're going to do on your own, then the obvious thing to do is to join an already existing community. And there are many of them, and there are all sorts of ways to find them. For example, there's global Eco-Villages Network, Eco-Villages Network Europe, and Eco-Villages Network UK. And they're really good sources of information for existing communities. Another obvious possibility is if you belong to a religious organisation. If you're a Buddhist, you'd want to find out the locality of your nearest Buddhist community. If you're a Muslim, same story. So I'm going to take the assumption that your situation is you want something somewhat different from that, and that you do have a small group of people and you're thinking about doing this. In that situation, you can still go and join an existing community, or you can go and create your own. And this is something I've done a few times with particularly great success on 2 occasions. And I'll be drawing upon those experiences to say what I'm going to say to you. So let's cut to the chase. You get a group of people together and you've got this idea. You want to form a community, you want to live together in this way. The very first thing that you need to think about is, what is it that binds the group of you together? Something which I would say to you would be something... God, this is really difficult today. Right, let's try again. In order for your community to be successful and sustainable, what you need between those of you that are going to do this is a common bond. And this bond needs to be strong. So I'll give you an example, first of all, what I would call a weak bond, which is not particularly suitable. Supposing a group of people get together and they decide they want to live sustainably and ecologically and close to the earth. Not going to do it, not really good enough. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but you've really got your work cut out if your bond is going to be as weak as that. If you and your friends happen to be a member of a religious organisation, you've got the golden ticket, because you will have a bond which is strong enough to do the job, which is why there are many successful, sustainable, long-term communities based upon people belonging to the same religion. Now, let's just look at that in a slightly different way. It's not membership of a religion that is making it so successful, it's the spiritual connection that's the important thing. So this is what I want to say to you. Very first thing you do is you get your group of people together and you work out what your spiritual common bond is. What have you got together spiritually which is going to nourish you and keep you going through the hard times as well as the good? Because this is what you need. You need a spiritual bond that is going to work through all that you go through. That really is your number one thing. So you get your group of people together, you find what it is you've got in common spiritually. So I want to explain to you now that, although I've done this a number of times before, I'm in the process of having just begun to do it again. And it's such an exciting place to be. So I will explain to you the way that it's working out for me as follows. The people who come to my retreats are discovering their common spiritual bond to be the love of nature and love of the particular plant medicines that we enjoy. This bond, I'm declaring, is strong enough because of the spiritual connection. That's the first thing. So let's assume you've got that common spiritual connection. The next thing you need to do is you need to get to know each other. And you may be friends, you may have known each other for a long time. However, if you're going to live together, you're going to need to explore who you are with each other in a much deeper way than you've done so far. A really great way to do this is to get together and meet very regular, at least a couple of times a week. And it's good to choose different times of the day. You might start meeting in the evenings after work. An incredibly helpful thing is if included in your common bond is a bond about food. If you feel the same way about food, this is a great step in the right direction and will help to bind you even further together, even more closely. So, an obvious thing you can do is you can start to meet in each other's homes and you can start to share food. And you can do it in different ways. You can all bring and share food in the same place, or you can take it in turns to be the host and hostess and provide the food in the home that you're having the meeting. The next step is to start meeting at different times. It's a really good idea, if you've never done so, to meet this group of people for breakfast. It changes the dynamic completely. And in this period of time, which may take anything from as little as months to as long as possibly years, you need to find as many different ways to explore what it's like to be together as possible. Sometimes you need to meet for these serious meetings to discuss land acquisition and such practical details. Other times you need to meet for fun and a laugh and just to hang out with each other. It's really important to do both. In fact, it's an essential step to create this bonding between the group, to meet for social and frivolous occasions as well as for serious full-on planning occasions. Very, very important. So that's something that's going to happen ongoing, and then there's going to come a certain point in time when you're going to feel you know each other well enough. Let's take it further. What you need to do is to literally take some time off and go on a holiday together. And one of the best ways to do this is camping. Camping is a way that brings you in touch with each other and nature, and you're starting to have the beginnings of the feel of what it might be like to live in community when you go camping together. And you may in the first instance just be taking tents and just choosing a small piece of land somewhere nearby, and it may only be for a couple of nights the first time. Doesn't matter. The important thing is you will learn so much more about each other when you start to camp. That's a really important next step. And while all this is going on, and it's very rare that I ever advocate this, but I'm actually going to advocate that you go and take a training. All over the world there's an organisation called the Permaculture Association. They have them in many, many different countries. To give an example, even a small country like Ecuador has its own Permaculture Association, and there are permaculture communities and farms in that country. So this is what you do. You enrolled at your local Permaculture Association to do a permaculture design course. This is an incredibly big step that you will take by doing this. It's a real sign of commitment, because you are now going to put some money and some time into learning some absolutely essential things about what you need to know before you actually set up a community. Permaculture is a design systems approach to life and working in harmony with nature, and it's a phenomenal training in its own right. The key words that the permaculture community uses as follows. They talk about earth care, people care, and fair shares. That's their three mission statements: earth care, people care, fair shares. That's something you can get behind quite easily for setting up a community. That's a good way to look at things. I'm going to throw out to you one of the permaculture axioms which I have found of extraordinary value in my life, and it's as follows: the problem is the solution. And this is what we begin with, because we begin with the problem. The problem is I am not living in a community, and I have the intention to do so. And so every step I take towards making this community a reality is me enacting the solution. So it might sound quite trite and quite simple, but you can go a long way with this axiom. You can explore it in all sorts of different ways. Try it out in practical situations in your life. Whenever you've got a situation which you are tempted to label as a problem, turn the whole thing on its head and see how that problem is an invitation to a solution. So go and do a permaculture design course. I did 2, and I'm immensely grateful for having done so. Now, you're meeting each other regularly, You've done some practical training that's going to be of incredible value to you. So now the next thing, obviously, you're going to start to look for land. And one of the things you'll realise is it depends on how much money you've got in your pocket as to what piece of land you can afford to obtain. And this is where you need to do your own internet research, land agents in the place that you're interested in finding land. And you do your searches, you look up all your information, and you start looking after land, after land, after land. Many, many plots of land, you get to examine them, looking at the photographs, looking into all the details. Then there's going to come a point when you're going to see that there are some which really are hitting the bill. So let me bring this next subject up to you. How do you know what you're looking for if you haven't identified it very clearly as a group? This means that in amongst your social meetings and practical organisational meetings, there's something else you're going to want to do, and that's have a meeting where each of you comes up with their personal vision for what it is that you as a group are after. Having done this with great success, I can help you to avoid the pitfalls. So what you do is you get together as a group. It's a really good time to do this as a breakfast group. It doesn't have to be. So you get together, you eat breakfast or whatever or whenever, and then this is what you do. Each person gets a piece of paper, and you have some writing and arts materials which are in the middle of the floor of the room where you're meeting. And with your piece of paper, when the exercise begins, you know what you've got to do. Your job is to create, using either words or diagrams or drawings or a mixture of all three, something on a piece of paper which represents your vision for this community. It could be a list, it could be a drawing, it could be a mixture, it could be a labelled diagram, it could be anything. And you have a limited period of time to do this. We gave ourselves, I think it was 15 or 20 minutes, this particular group I was working with at the time. And here's the important detail. This is your uncensored vision, your pure vision of exactly what you want, being completely thinking only about you. Really important detail, that. So the group does this. They have this time, 15, 20 minutes. They're creating their own personal vision, each person, of what they want. And then they stop and they get a big sheet of paper out on the floor or on a big table. And then what you do is, using the principles of Tony Buzan. Tony Buzan is a guy who writes books about mind mapping. Go look it up. Mind mapping, Tony Buzan. What you then do is you create a mind map of these individual visions, which then combine to create a map of what it is that you intend for yourselves as a community group. This is a phenomenal step to take, because then suddenly it's no longer in each of your heads, it's actually out there on paper, and you can look at it, you can change it, you can alter it, you can amend it. And this is what happened with us. And one of the most remarkable things about this process is we'd actually manifested our dream, we've made it come true, we've been living it for 18 months, and this piece of paper was now stuck on the back of the door of the office that was one of the facilities we had in our community. And two of us just were talking, and we saw the map of our intentions on this piece of paper on the back of this door, and we walked over, started looking at all the details, and we were both shocked by the extent to which we manifested all the precise requirements that we had. So this is the point. If you start off with your manifestation process from a perspective of censoring it, about, well, I've got to take into account this, that and the other, you've lost the purity of your vision. If you all begin with purity of vision, then you have the possibility of manifesting everything that everybody wants. If you water it down, if you dilute it, if you try immediately to come to some kind of common consensus, you've lost that possibility. The common consensus comes in the creation of the group mandala, as we call it. So that's really important stuff you need to know. And these, I say, are essential steps. I've met people who've formed communities, and they've literally met each other like 2 or 3 times over 2 or 3 weekends, and then they've pulled the money and they've bought the land and they've not had a clue what to do with each other, and they've immediately erupted into infighting, discord, dissension, and hostility, and utter failure. So I am really laying this on with a trowel. These steps I'm suggesting are incredibly valuable to make it successful. Let's wind ourselves on. You've done all this work. You're continuing to meet each other. You're starting to go out on camps together. It's all going very well. You've got this whole database of pieces of land you're looking at. Well, let's look at the land we're looking at. There's one thing that's more important on that piece of land than anything else, and that's a water supply. Should you be fortunate enough to have a spring or a working well with good, healthy water on your piece of land, that is it. You've got the golden ticket and the platinum ticket wrapped up into one. That gives you the ability to solve pretty much any problem that ever arises if you've got access to water on site. That is a big one. It's the biggest one of all. If you find the best piece of land in the world and there's no access to water, there's no spring, there's no well, there's no pipe to water, there's no water of any kind, you may really want to think several times, maybe a few dozen times before taking it further. Human beings need water, the best quality, the better. So that's a really important criterion for you when you're looking for your land. Look for a land with a spring or springs on site. Sorted if you got that. Which brings us up to the next thing, and if you've been very much of an idealist, this might not be one of the things foremost in your mind. When it comes to living in your land, you will know how important it is. We're now talking about access. So where is the nearest road? Is the nearest road an access road? How big is it? What's it like? Is there a track that takes you all the way to the land? Or would you have to create one? Do you have any idea how much money and time it takes to create a track? Give you an example. I've got a friend of mine who's got 1 hectare of land. He wants to make a simple car parking space and a track going up into the centre of the land, into a loop and back down again, and a bit of hard standing for his structure. 180 tonnes of quarry waste is what it took for him to do that, and I do believe that's probably not a full figure. I bet he's ordered more since then. So in excess of 200 tonnes of quarry waste just to create simple access for 1 hectare of land gives you an idea of some of the issues. So if you've got a track that takes you all the way to your land, that's a great advantage. And at first you're not going to be wanting to create your actual tracks on the land. You want to give that time. So here we are. You've got your group of people together, you've got your spiritual bond, you've got your common intentions, you've created your vision for the group, for what it is you're after, you're investigating a piece of land, you've got your database selection of land you're looking at, you've got access to water, you've worked out access through vehicles to the site. And even if nobody owns a car, you're going to need vehicular access because you're going to need vehicle to transport your materials there. Definite, you're going to need it. So it's really coming on now, isn't it? You've got these plots of land, and of course you've been doing whatever is required to raise the money, whatever works for you. That's all happening. Money is being raised, that's giving you your budget. Things are really coming on. You're getting to the point when it's almost time to make a selection. There's 3 pieces of land, which one are we going to go for? Of course, when it gets to the point of narrowing it down, you have to visit each piece of land. Ideally, you want to spend as much time as you can afford there. If it's a long way away, you might only be able to spend the day. Spend as much time as you can, learn everything that you can. You will have already done your permaculture design course before this point. Therefore, you will know all of the important criteria to be looking for when it comes to a piece of land. You know how important the aspect is, how if the land has what we call a south-facing aspect, and you're living in what I call one of the cooler parts of the world, then you've maximised your chances of being able to grow your plants successfully. Very important indeed. If you're in a very hot country, then a far more important consideration might be existing trees on the land to give you shelter and shade. So your permaculture design course will have clued you into all the issues that you need to be looking for on this piece of land. Another thing that's going to be important for you to be aware of is the water table. What is the water table like? Do you even know what that is? Okay, you dig into the ground and at a certain point you will hit water. Now if you've got a very high water table and you wanted to build, say, a very innovative underground dwellings like earthships possibly, high water table, it's not going to work because they're going to get flooded. So if you want to build earthships underground, you want to make sure that the water table is lower down, and you could dig quite a long way before you reach water. Such things are important to consider. What is the soil like? Is it a clay soil? Is it a sandy soil? Is it a loamy soil? Incredibly important to know these things because that's going to dictate and determine what kind of growing you're going to be able to do, what kind of plants you're going to be able to grow to sustain yourselves on with food. Such things become incredibly important. As you're beginning to see, there's a lot involved. So here comes to another of the really important permaculture principles. Supposing you've done all your selection process, and maybe you've even done some magic and some divination to come up with, yeah, this is a piece of land, okay, we're going to go for it. Well, there's something else you need to consider before buying, before taking action. What are the planning laws and statutes like in the locality in which you are considering living? Is it like West Penwith in West Cornwall, which is one of the most draconian local authorities possibly in the world, definitely in the British Isles, where the planners will do absolutely everything in their power to prevent you from fulfilling your dream? Yes, you need to be aware of the fact that there are people like this and they do exist, and it depends on which country you go for, which region of which country you go for, as to how easy or difficult this is going to be. There are some parts of the world where there is a great resistance to any new developments, and you've got your work cut out. Doesn't mean to say you can't do it. You just might have to take into account the fact that it might take, say, between 8 and 10 years to go through a very complicated process involving lots of administration with your local authority, lots of emails, site visits, all sorts of things, and money being spent by you to get your planning permission, maybe. Or it could be the place that you choose is so free and easy and so relaxed that they actually welcome people with open arms. They like people to move in because they've got a problem where the villages in that region are becoming depopulated because everyone's moved to towns and cities. Do you see how important this could be for you? It could be absolutely critical to the success or failure of your venture. If you're willing to take on a protracted planning battle, then by all means consider England and Wales as possible countries for somewhere you might want to choose to live. However, if you want a quieter life, you might want to choose somewhere different. And here's another important issue. You need to understand and have a good familiarity with the laws of the country where you're considering buying a piece of land. I know of certain countries in Southern Europe, for example, where people have gone and done their investigation, found a nice piece of land, paid some money for it all legally, as so they thought, and then they discovered that there's a whole tier of administration they hadn't even the awareness of, which means that the whole claim to the land is null and void, and then the money they've spent is actually worth nothing, and they don't have the access to the land at all. Yes, this is out of my casebook, histories of people that I've known that have fallen foul of local circumstances, which then brings me to the next point. When you are getting to the point of making this choice, when you're making sure that you're not going to be ripped off by some bullshit administrative practices from another country which you're not familiar with, when you're not going to get screwed by the local planning authorities which are going to make your life a living misery, you've avoided all these pitfalls, you've found your way through, and it's all working out for you just right. Then it comes that point when, yes, it's finally time to buy your land. What a moment that is. Incredibly exciting. Now, some people don't buy land. Another way to do things, which is what we did in one community group, we moved onto the land belonging to somebody else. Wonderful man. Very loving, very all-encompassing in his approach to life. And yet we discovered this issue, which is when you've got one person who owns the land and the other people don't own the land, there's an inbuilt inequality which no amount of fluffiness will be able to conceal or disguise. If one person owns the land, it means they've called the shots, it means they've got the ace of trumps in their hand when they're playing their card game. It gives them an unfair advantage. So it's an option you may choose to take. We did take that option. We actually abandoned our plan for 20 acres, and which we would have raised the money for ourselves. We had the money to do this, and we plumped for the 225 acres and not spending any money whatsoever, and accepting this incredibly kind invitation which we were given to move on to someone else's land and make that work. So there is so much to consider, isn't there? That's why it's such a big deal. So when I've had this question being asked to me by people as a result of putting the film up, Middlewood, an eco community, it really gave me pause for thought, because I thought, oh my goodness me, it's such a big question to answer. So I'm almost getting to the end of this part one, which is finally you've bought your piece of land, finally you've got your group together, it's all happening. This is going to be seen like a really strange piece of advice, but what permaculture would advise you to do is to get to know that land for up to 12 months before making any irrevocable moves. Which is why one of the best ways you can handle things is to live in what I call temporary low-impact structures. A bender, a geodesic dome, a yurt, a caravan, any temporary structure is the best thing to move on to with, because you can try putting up your structure in one particular place and live there for a bit, and you can realise that when you've lived on that land for a couple of months, well, actually I'd be much better off if I was over there, because there's no wind, it's a much warmer spot, it's very sheltered. Yeah, thank God I'm living in a yurt in this spot, which is actually not very good, because I'll just take my yurt and put it over there. This sort of thing is possible with a temporary structure. The other thing is getting to know the land over the year. If you're living in a 4-season climate, means you experience all the 4 seasons. You get to discover what a frost pocket is, and you wouldn't want to live in one of those necessarily, because it means that for a substantial part of the winter months you're going to be waking up to a much colder temperature, and if you just moved a few yards over there and we're outside the frost pocket, these are the kind of details that you discover in the first year of living in a place. You might find there's a particular part of your land that is subjected to some pretty nasty insects biting and stinging, and when you move over to that particular part of the land, they aren't there because it's too high up. These are the kind of details that you get to find out through living on the land and through spending time on the land. So in the first 12 months, don't take any irrevocable steps about where you're going to put anything permanent. And then here's a completely contradictory piece of advice: as soon as possible, if there are not already plenty of trees there, start your tree planting program. You can only plant trees in the northern and southern cooler climes of the world in what we call the winter months. So for example, if you're living in northern Europe, that's only really from October through to March. The rest of the time you can't plant your trees, because if you try, they're going to die. What a massive subject this is, and I realise I'm only scraping the surface of what is a fascinating subject. And what will happen is I will be doing a series of films on this subject. One of the next films will be titled Flower of Life Communities. I'll explain what a flower of life is and what a flower of life community is, and I will take you through my process with the group that I'm working with to create our own community, and I'll reveal to you in time where it's going to be, and you will see how it all unfolds. So this isn't just, hey guys, this is how you do it. I've done it before and I'm doing it again. So I very much enjoy if you want to follow me with me on this journey. Thank you very much indeed. Cheers.